In this video, I'm going to tell you about 8 books that I really like. They're in the marketing and productivity sort of genres, and I happen to own them all. I just walked over to my bookshelf and pulled them off. So they're not necessarily in order, or these aren't necessarily like my top #1 books, but I definitely got a lot out of them. Now, quick note, a lot of times I'll read a book, copy like an ebook, I'll check it out from the library, and usually I don't buy a physical book unless I really, really like it, and oftentimes it's after I've already read it once. So that's interesting to note, just because like books take up a lot of space, and a lot of times space is limited. So leave a comment below. Let me know some of your favorite marketing and productivity books. Would love to get your feedback. Without further ado, let's go to book #1. So first one in no particular order. So we're gonna hit the marketing ones first, but the first one here is the 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. This here is like the original version that was published back in 1993. They have a newer book, these guys, Ahrefs and Jack Trout, and they are the authors of Positioning as well. So this is a very good book here, highly recommend it, and it's a quick read. It's only about 130 some odd pages, so it goes really fast, and each of the 22 just has a few pages. Now the interesting part with this older 1993 version, the case studies and examples are obviously dated, so sometimes they are not necessarily relevant, but it's interesting to look back now, many years later, to see how like things played out. So funny thing is some of the stuff is just not as relevant, at least case study wise. However, the lessons, the 22 laws are quite good, and I got a lot of insights for my business just from reading this book. #2 is All Marketers Are Liars, or actually they tell stories. So this is a Seth Godin book, and really it's about telling stories, and they mention it right in the title. Seth mentions it right in the title. So it's pretty straightforward, but Seth gives a lot of case studies, and the tagline here is the underground classic that explains how marketing really works and why authenticity is the best marketing of all. So it doesn't necessarily go along with some of the 22 immutable laws, since there is a bit of psychology, and I don't want to say manipulation, but in the 22 immutable laws, they actually caution, they say, violate the laws at your own risk. So this is all about telling stories, which is very like Seth Godin-esque, and this is more about not necessarily telling stories, but taking advantage of like opportunities as they present themselves in 22 specific ways. This isn't like a thorough book review. I'm just kind of hitting the high levels, what I happen to remember. Next one is Influence. So this is an excellent book here, and it is The Psychology of Persuasion by Robert Cialdini. I heard about this book for a couple years before I actually read it, and again, this is one that I read the electronic copy from the library first, and then it was so good that I purchased it, and I've since read it again. This one's a little bit longer. This is about 300 pages. Great case studies and examples in here, and I've heard this book referenced by a lot of mentors from afar that I look up to over and over again. So if you haven't read this book, I highly recommend it. It'll give you great insight to when you're being marketed to, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad, right? Like sometimes you're marketed something that you need and you're happy that you found the product and that sort of thing. But in other cases, say like when you're gonna buy a car, or you're buying an appliance or something kind of expensive, like a lot of times there's several things happening that maybe you're not aware of, right? When you go to a car dealership, for example, and they're giving out cookies or lunch, or maybe they're grilling out over the summer, and they're feeding your family. Like all those little things like are doing little psychological things to persuade you to maybe buy a car from that place, or maybe not to accept a deal, or to accept the deal that's maybe not the best one for you. So when you start looking for that stuff, you're a little bit more skeptical. And again, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily bad, but you can watch out for yourself a little bit more closely. So there are 6 different influences that Robert, the doctor, mentions in the book, with lots of examples and case studies and ways to like implement it for your business, or if it's happening to you, what to do if someone's trying to persuade you, maybe in a way that you don't want to be persuaded. So excellent book, highly recommend it. A very classic marketing book. All right, and the next few are more on productivity. So first one here is Essentialism, and this is by Greg McKeown. The tagline here is the disciplined pursuit of less. I mean, that kind of sums it up. It's really about focusing down and figuring out what is important, what is essential, and then being vigilant to eliminate things that aren't essential so that you can actually do a better job at the things that are essential and that are important to you. And I saw this firsthand over and over in my business. The more things that I've tried to do, the worse everything is, right? I'm more stressed out. I'm doing a worse job on each of the little pieces. And as I've eliminated, less essential pieces of the business or tasks that maybe aren't essential, I do better at everything else. And I need to do more of it. The more you do, the more you focus, the better you'll execute. So this book describes Greg's journey and then how he was able to focus and how he's turned it into like a specific thing that he excels at. Now the other part is around like how to implement it yourself. It's not easy to do. It's saying no to a lot of things that maybe are good, maybe you kind of like these tasks or whatever they are for you, but if you can eliminate them, you'll actually be happier. So really good book if you haven't checked it out. I think this book and The One Thing kind of go hand in hand. They're really saying the same things. However, I like Greg McKeown's writing a little bit better. It's a little bit more approachable and like solid in my opinion. Next we have Deep Work by Cal Newport, another excellent book. And this is all about, again, focusing up and working on something, very intentionally. So the biggest thing I got out of Deep Work was to set aside blocks of time so that you're actually, able to focus, get rid of distractions, and really get some good work done. Deep work. So if I just had to sum it up in a sentence, that is really it. It goes a lot deeper, and there are techniques and ideas and ways that you can implement it no matter where you work. But if you are an entrepreneur or you're working on, for example, affiliate sites, then this kind of gives you a good model on focusing on a specific thing, eliminating those distractions where maybe, for example, you sit down and you're like, oh, I'm not 100% sure what to work on. You only have about an hour and a half to work on something on your business. And then you're searching around trying to figure out what to work on for 45 minutes. And that leaves you just a few minutes to, actually work on the tasks. Not a great way to get things done. So if you approach things a little bit more intentionally, and if you're able to set aside time for the deep work, you'll really make more headway and it will be much better, more enjoyable, and you'll be less stressed out. So Deep Work, Cal Newport, really good, pretty inspiring. Like once you read it, you could try a couple things and see what works for you. Next, we have the Checklist Manifesto, and this is by Atul Gawande. And this is a great book. I remember I actually got this book at a project management conference that I went to a few years back. And I think it was pretty new back then. The general idea is how to get things right and make it simple. Checklist is right in the title, so you can imagine that they reference checklists, and there are great case studies in here. Atul Gawande is a great writer, so there are stories and then there are ways to implement the ideas in whatever your business is or whatever you're trying to do. So he references a few like checklists from like pilots, for example. So they need to be very concise, very simple to follow in a stressful situation, for example. And the consequences are quite high if a mistake is made. So Atul Gawande is actually a surgeon, and he implemented checklists in the medical field. Worked out pretty well. I don't know all the stats here, but he implemented these checklists, and it helped surgeons and doctors do their job better and help people. basically. And if I had to sort of summarize some of the main ideas, is with a checklist, you can take a very complex set of tasks or process and you have to simplify it. Like, you really need to make it simple and easy to follow. Otherwise, people won't use the checklist. So when you're thinking about, for example, hiring a freelance contractor to do some work for you, it's probably not the best thing to give them a 32-point checklist that they have to follow with a bunch of steps. It's going to be a little bit harder, all right? It's going to be hard for them to follow that. It'll be overwhelming when you're first working with them, for example. It would be better to, break it down into, something a little bit easier to deal with. Now, maybe you could work your way up to like a longer checklist, or maybe even, here's a better idea, maybe divide it up into multiple phases. So there are, maybe only 5 or 6 things in one checklist, and then they can move on to the next phase and 5 or 6 things. But again, the main idea is to like simplify things. So you can make something very complex, simple to work with, and hopefully simple to get right. So Checklist Manifesto, really good to check out, especially when you're thinking about scaling a process and or trying to get things right. Obviously, it's important to get things right. Next is The Power of Habit. This is by Charles Duhigg. I actually reviewed this book on my site, Niche Site Project, a few years ago. And for whatever reason, right, I didn't reach out to Charles Duhigg specifically, but he saw it on Twitter and actually like tweeted back. He like checked out the article, which is kind of cool. He's a multiple New York Times bestseller. I was a little embarrassed about my writing at the time, but he checked it out and like responded back to me. So that was pretty cool. Anyway, this book is great. It talks about habits and working with your own habits, whether you want to form new habits that are positive or get rid of habits that maybe you don't like so much. There's a lot of ideas and techniques in here. One of the best parts in this book is, well, they give great case studies. There's fantastic examples. Charles Duhigg is a great writer as well. At the end of the book, there's like a 15 or 20 page how to implement the power of habit, and it's short. It's actionable, and it's something that you can, read the book, you get a good understanding, then you can skip on to the end and actually figure out how to implement this stuff for yourself. It's very straightforward. There's a few techniques, again, kind of like some of the other books like Deep Work and Essentialism. You can take some ideas, try them, and see how they work for you. And then, keep the ones that are great, and maybe some you don't like that much. It's fine. Get rid of them. If you don't like them, if it's not working for you, then just get rid of them and stick with the ones that are working for you. All right, last book here. This is Smarter, Faster, Better, again, by Charles Duhigg. So I really like The Power of Habit. And when this book on productivity came out a couple years ago, I was really excited. I actually bought it right when it came out, got the hardcover and everything. I knew I was going to like it. So this is one of the books that I didn't read beforehand, before I actually went ahead and purchased the hard physical copy. So again, great book. It's really about productivity. And the interesting thing in this book is Charles goes over individual productivity and how you can manage your own tasks and overall long-term goals. But he also talks about team settings. And there were a few studies that Google did in the last few years. It's referenced in the book. So if you're building a team and you want to increase the productivity from your team, there are a lot of tips about that. Couple things that may seem counterintuitive. You should have team meetings like once a week, and you should have one-on-ones with your manager or with people that are reporting to you. So a couple things happen when you have, for example, the team meetings, or maybe you would just have 10 minutes of casual discussion about, hey, what's going on in everyone's life? And people are talking about things that are unrelated to work at all. And it feels like a waste of time. I remember sitting in conference rooms and people were just chatting. You're thinking, hey, let's get to the point. We have an agenda. Let's go ahead and power through so we can get to work and stop wasting time in this conference room just chatting about meaningless stuff. It turns out that's really good for a team to have that bond and to know each other outside of work and not just work on work at work, to be really redundant. So that's one aspect. And then one-on-ones with your team, really important. I always did this when I had a team in my corporate environment, back in my corporate job. It gives you a chance to make sure everything's going okay. They can talk to you a little bit more freely than perhaps in the group environment maybe people are a little bit shy and that sort of thing. So this book gives you tips for individual productivity and team productivity. Same deal, Charles, at the end of this book, there's like a short implementation guide, 15, 20 pages, so you can read the book, get the core ideas, and then skip to the, not skip to the end, but you can go over the implementation guide at the end so you have like specific actionable things that you could try. And again, like always, test these out. You know, some things you're not really going to enjoy, other things are gonna work great for you. So test them out, don't discount them automatically, and don't feel like you have to do something that you really don't enjoy or maybe doesn't work well for you. So those are my 8 books on marketing and productivity, just a few that I personally own. And let me know, have you read any of these? Thanks for watching. I'm Doug Cunnington. I talk about affiliate marketing, productivity, and project management. If you're new to the channel, please have a look around. And if you like what you see, please subscribe. Thanks.